Thank you for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schmidt, your on-air producer. Jeff Wasden is in studio with us today. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Tammy. How you doing?
I'm great. Jeff
Good.
is the president of the Colorado Business Roundtable, and today we're going to be talking about a number of the ballot measures we're looking at on the ballot today, and I guess it's kind of funny.
There's a few of them
because you may already be done voting, or you're still kind of wondering where you're going to go on some of these. So stick around; we've got a bunch of information.
If you're smart, you returned it the day you got it, because it's a pretty sure sign that you'll eliminate 2/3 of your phone traffic and noise from being sought after by numerous campaigns and candidates.
What? They do not stop calling you if you put in your ballot.
Oh, yeah.
That's a dream. If that's true, I need to go get it in right now.
Yeah, real quick. Don't leave yet. 5 o'clock you can leave.
Well, no, I gotta go. You can handle this, Jeff.
All right, fair enough.
Hey, I want to tell everybody we're trying something new here as well. You're listening on air here on 1690, and we're also doing a video live stream of the show. We're trying it out. You can check that out at cobrt.com. It's in the post for today's show that we described the show to you.
There's good and bad of this, obviously.
Yeah.
I think people can see, look, we're prepared.
You can see our mess of...
There's no Angry Bird or Solitaire on the computer screen.
Yeah, well, yeah,
I'm not wearing shorts. The downside is the people with face for radio like us, we got a little problem when people can actually see us. But it's a great addition to the COBRT Connect and Collaborate radio show. And Wayne, actually, we've got a special guest coming on, our Secretary of State, Wayne Williams. And when he heard his picture was going to be on there, he said he was going to call in, because I don't think he was a big fan of that idea. Is that right, Wayne?
Well, that may or may not be the case, or it might have something to do with the fact you asked me a few minutes ago.
Well,
3 minutes before the show. Hey, Wayne, we'll put a really nice picture of your headshot, so it's your glamour shot.
We'll backfill you, Wayne. Don't worry. Well, Wayne, a quick question for you. And first of all, thanks for jumping in at last minute. But since we are talking about the ballot and the election upcoming, what better authority than the own Secretary of State here in the great state of Colorado, Wayne Williams? Hey, Wayne, first question: is this a great time if I was one of your employees to take some vacation days?
We would probably question the timing of that. We've got a lot of people who are working really hard right now. We have actually been in all 64 counties this week and last week, just to make sure that everything is going smoothly with the election for each of our county clerks. And so this is the time when they need our responsiveness, and we work very hard to provide that.
How concerned are those 64 county clerks and you and your office about Trump's allegations and the Russians? Are they controlling you in the election here, Wayne?
We work very hard to ensure the integrity of the system, Jeff, and so we have a host of procedures in place. And so in every county, there are bipartisan judges. Those are judges who are actually appointed by the Democrat and by the Republican Party. And many of the steps they do are conducted with both of them there. In fact, every significant step is conducted with a Republican and a Democrat as part of the process. And so sometimes counties ask, well, doesn't it cost more money to have two judges go to that ballot box? And the answer is yes, but that's an important part of the integrity of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there's this discussion, it gives us the opportunity to talk about the wonderful things that Colorado does to ensure the integrity of the elections.
I saw I think a tweet earlier from Miss Lynn Bartels in your office. They're correcting, I think, a misconception about a deadline today. Today is not the deadline to turn in your ballot, but today is a deadline important to Colorado voters out there. Wayne, if you could shed some light on what today's deadline is in relation to ballot access and mail-in ballots.
Sure. If you want us to mail you a ballot, if you want the clerk to mail you a ballot, go online and do that. To the today, or contact the clerk and ask them to do that today. After that, you're still welcome to participate, to register to come in, but you'll need to go into the voter service and polling center to do that. Now, we have many of them all across the state, and frankly, to this point, they've been really underutilized. And so we want people, there's been an average, across the state of about, even in the busy counties, one person every 20 minutes. And so we want to encourage folks to go in, do it soon. Don't wait until the last day of the election.
Wayne, talk a little bit about how many registered voters we have in the state of Colorado and how many ballots to date have actually been returned.
So we have about 3.1 million ballots that went out to our active registered voters. As of early this morning, we had 866,668 that have been received by the county clerks. Now, obviously, that doesn't include ones turned in over the weekend because they have not yet been processed. But we're probably by this point, so tomorrow morning's report will probably show about a third of the state has already voted. And so it's a easy process for people to get involved with. And it's very easy to cast your ballot in Colorado. And we want you to do that. We want you to do it only once. And we
just the one
encourage
time?
you to be involved. Just one time.
Hey, Wayne, what is that, those return numbers, and how many Coloradans do you expect to return ballots this year by close of 7 o'clock on November 8th?
So the ballot has to be back to your county clerk by 7 p.m. on November 8th. Tomorrow is the last day you should really mail a ballot. Anytime after that, you should drop it off. While many of them would get through, we want to make sure that no one's ballot is not counted because it arrives late. So if you're going to mail, do it by tomorrow. Otherwise, drop it off. 4 years ago, we had about 2.6 million people vote for president in Colorado. So we will probably have, given the growth of the state, a little bit more than that this time. But we'd be happy if all 3.1 million voted. Colorado has had the third highest turnout in the last two general elections in the country, and we try to make it easy for people to participate in that process.
Thanks for weighing in with us, Wayne. We're so glad to have Secretary of State Wayne Williams on the line with us. We'll be back with more with Kelly Sloan and more on the ballot measures. Stay
Thanks, Wayne, for jumping in last minute. Yeah. Go ahead, Wayne.
Oh, I'm sure he cut him off. He's not on.
Oh.
You have to text him. Thanks for staying with us today on Connect and Collaborate. We're so glad to have you along. We're talking with Jeff Wasden, President of the Colorado Business Roundtable. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, it was a great treat as well to have Wayne hop on there. And he was trying to get in a last-second plug there that you can actually track your ballots
at
the progress of that.
GoVoteColorado.com. You can track the ballot you've already mailed in or
Make sure
submitted.
it's returned or received and processed appropriately. So one of those things, if you're worried about, did they get my ballot? Is it going to count? That was Wayne's last parting shot. Not to give me a hard time, not to make fun of me for a last-minute call, but it's great to be able to reach out to your Secretary
he's a
of
good
State
guy.
and get him on. He's a great guy and doing a fantastic job. And I was going to try and ask him about the night of the 8th versus the morning of the 9th and see if see what his day and night look like. I'm sure he's going to be a little busy, and staff's prepared, and they're going to do a great job, make sure the results not only are all counted but done so accurately and fairly, which is great. So, Kelly, it's great to have you here. Kelly Sloan, longtime COBRT contributing co-host here, and today we're talking some of our election issues and some of the ballot measures that we have facing us. As we've talked about before, there's really a couple refer to big regional with the SCFD and several other constitutional amendments and propositions that are being proposed. Of course, the Colorado Business Roundtable is formally came out in opposition of the minimum wage increase and Amendment 69, Colorado Care, the universal health care system. We'll talk about those. We're certainly in supporting the SCFD 4B measure and raise the bar. And we're going to get into those. Kelly, I really wanted to kind of frame this, the idea of what is a state constitution? Why do state constitutions matter? And what's happening here in Colorado that we have not one or two measures to talk about, but multiple measures that Colorado voters are facing. You know, you look at the idea of defining the structure of government, right? Enumerating those rights, those limitations on the powers of government. Those have been deeply rooted in the Anglo-American history and society. But I think state constitutions, especially here in Colorado, have been used very differently.
Well, absolutely they have. And first of all, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure being here. I should say up front in full disclosure that I am working on the campaign against Amendment 70, Keep Colorado Working, and for Raise the Bar, the campaign in favor of Amendment 71.
Well, good. We're 2 for 2 then. Otherwise, we may have to throw you out.
Well, yeah.
It was nice
Or
to
at least
see
have a
us.
fun debate on here, if nothing else.
No, and thank you for the Colorado Business Roundtable taking those positions. And you're right. You know, I have somewhere here the Oxford definition of constitution. Just to paraphrase, it is the document which establishes how an organization, such as a government, is run, how it operates. And in the American Anglo tradition, it also codifies the rights that we already possess. What it's become in Colorado, and we can talk a little bit more about this when we talk about Raise the Bar Amendment 71, but it's become a policy book, as Greg Brophy likes to say. It's become a depository for the whim of the day, the political whim of the day. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because it is probably the easiest constitution in the United States to amend. The standards to amend the Constitution by citizens initiative are exactly the same as for changing a statutory law. So it kind of incentivizes groups all over the place to come to Colorado and put things in the Constitution, because once they're there. Pretty much permanently.
Yeah,
Well,
a little
hard
bit
to
of a
get to-
petri dish, right? The laboratory
Yeah.
of democracy playing out here in the state of Colorado. You start fighting over things like same-sex marriage, eminent domain, healthcare reform, gun control, free speech, private property, equal education funding, school vouchers, recall elections, and everything that, again, I think part of our challenges, are those supposed to be baked into a state's constitution? Or do you allow the framework and structure of the Constitution and then use the legislative powers
Right.
that are there to really drive the agenda? And
Well, and then the danger is that some of these special interest groups from outside of the state are coming in to test it out here, and then we're stuck with it.
Absolutely. I mean, under a federal system, yes, the states are supposed to be to a certain degree the laboratories of democracy, like you say. That ideas should be tested out here as opposed to the national scale. But to put something again in the Constitution, if you want to try something out, try it out as a law, try it out as a statute. Don't put it in.
Right.
It's kind of like it's the political equivalent of replacing a load-bearing wall instead of changing the wallpaper. And what people
I
are
don't
coming.
like that well anymore.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
and
or-
what people are doing is they are tearing down the walls
Yeah.
instead of just changing the wallpaper, and that's
a good
that's
analogy.
unfortunately what we've been seeing in Colorado with this urge that we have for direct democracy.
let's get into Amendment 70, this minimum wage proposal in there, and because we like to either prove that we do pay attention and do some research here, or that we actually understand some factual context around Amendment 70 and this minimum wage question. I want to get into the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So there's about 77.2 million hourly employees right now in the United States of America. Only 1.2 million of those actually earn minimum wage. That's 1.6%. So I think there's this misnomer that there's millions of folks out there that are not making a living wage. And I think there's a very big, important description and understanding of minimum wage and living wages and what entry-level jobs are supposed to be. So, Kelly, let's jump into this. What is Amendment 70? Who's behind that, and what's it trying to do?
Well, it's the unions, AFL-CIO, are the largest contributors to Amendment 70. Amendment 70 would be an increase in the state's minimum wage. It's a 44% increase. Between now and 2022, $12 an hour. It would, and actually it's 70% for businesses like restaurants or bars that employ tipped workers, because the tip credit isn't being adjusted accordingly. So I think most of you probably know what the tip credit is, but for businesses like restaurants that hire tipped employees, they get a $3.02 tip credit. So the wage actually being paid to tipped employees is right now it's $5.29 instead of $8.31. So that's staying at $3.02. So the minimum wage for those employees is going from $5.29 to I think it's $8.98. So that's a 70% increase for. And here's the problem with it: it's an increase that is across the board for Colorado. It's the same rate increase being foisted on small restaurants in places like Grand Junction or Craig or Sterling or Fort Morgan as it is for high-end establishments in places like downtown Denver or Cherry Creek. A lot of these smaller businesses, especially in rural areas, which are operating on much tighter margins for a variety of causes, for a variety of reasons, they're going to be looking at the exact same rate increase. There's no exemption for economically depressed areas or for rural areas or for smaller businesses, and that's where the impacts are going to be hit. Now, you mentioned at the beginning you're looking at 1.6% of the working population, and I should add also that the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that roughly half or a little over half of minimum wage earners are under the age of 25. The proponents of Amendment 70 are being a little bit clever, saying that only a small fraction of those are between ages 16 and 20. So they're trying to say that these aren't just students. Well, they're under 25. A lot of these are students. A lot of these are husband or wife looking to take a second job to help make ends meet. A few retired people, that kind of thing. But what we need to recognize is that the negative impacts of a minimum wage increase are not going to be felt by the majority of us. It's going to be felt by the poorest people in our society, the lowest wage workers. They're the ones that are going to be impacted by loss of employment, the loss of these jobs that simply aren't going to be there anymore, and they're jobs these people need because they don't have a skill set or education or various other things that to take them to other jobs. That's why they're in these jobs. And there's also the inflationary aspect. In order to make up the increase in the cost of labor, businesses either have to decrease their cost of labor, which means laying somebody off, or generally what happens is they simply don't replace somebody that moves on, or they have to raise their costs.
Automate it or something.
We all remember, or a lot of us probably remember when we used to go into a supermarket and there would be somebody there that would check your groceries, and there would be a kid there that would bag them for you. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't see that very often anymore. You may see one or two, checkout people. Everything else is going through. Everybody else is going through a self checkout line. We're doing it all ourselves. So those jobs don't exist anymore, and that's one major reason.
Well, I think, Kelly, to that point, right, and we talked a little bit about the two different Colorado economies between the metro area and certainly the rural communities, and the impact that you mentioned about automation. I think one of the challenges and the reason why the Colorado Business Roundtable really took a position on this is, while we can certainly mandate wages, we can't mandate businesses staying open. The impacts to these businesses. Our issue with the Colorado Business Roundtable is you've got 551-ish thousand people over the age of 25 filling those minimum wage jobs. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about this fight for 12 or the fight for 15. And what the Colorado Business Roundtable and our friends over at Job Creators Network are saying is we should be talking about the fight for 50. These hundreds of thousands of 50K jobs and up right now in IT or healthcare that are unfilled, unmet, right? And how do we equip and train folks to give them the opportunity to move from these entry-level jobs and acquire the skills and training to fill a much more rewarding, high-paying job? We've got a lot of people that aren't career ready, that aren't college ready, that are falling by the cracks or the wayside right now. And we need to make sure that we empower those, give them the tools necessary to achieve the jobs that are going to provide those living wage, median income jobs here in America.
Right, and taking their jobs away from that opportunity, that employment opportunity is really what we're talking about here. Is that's what's being reduced when you're increasing these labor costs. And I'd like to touch real quickly on the inflationary aspect as well. Businesses have to increase their prices in order to compensate for this. And who does that hurt the most? Well, again, that's going to hurt the poor. Well, it's going to hurt the poor. The poor people who need to really stretch their dollar more. If their dollar isn't worth as much, one of the arguments.
And the low wage earners that now are paying more for what they need.
Exactly.
We're going to be back with more with Kelly Sloan. He's a public affairs consultant. I can talk today. And Jeff Wasden is with us in studio as well. We're going to talk more Amendment 71 next.
Thanks, Don.
We're so happy you're joining us today on Connect and Collaborate. I'm Tammy Schmidt, your on-air producer. Today, our guest is Kelly Sloan. He's a public affairs consultant working on various ballot measure campaigns. Thanks, Kelly, for being here with us.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
And Jeff Wasden is in studio, president of the Colorado Business Roundtable.
Perfect sign that best radio happens off air. That was an entertaining break. Welcome back.
Which nobody needs to
and
see or
since
hear.
people are seeing this, Kelly, I'm going to raise my chair up.
You look a little...
You were cheating over there. I look so short compared to you.
Oh, well.
You know, the TV is going to take off some height and add some pounds or something here. I don't know
Yes,
what.
just to explain to our listeners on the radio, we're also live streaming the video on cobrt.com. If you go to the radio podcast page, it's on today's blog post.
So if you want to see what Tammy looks like, go check it out.
And just remember, it's Halloween.
That's right.
And you can look at Tammy and ignore the two of us.
Got my mask on or something. Hey, Kelly, as we get ready to kind of close the chapter on minimum wage in that discussion, any final thoughts before we move into 71 Raise the Bar?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, who is going to be injured most by a raise in the minimum wage, and paradoxically, it's going to be the very people that the proponents are intending to help. That's the low-wage worker. The one of the arguments that proponents try and put out there is that when you raise these wages, they're going to spend them, which they will, in the economy, and that's going to help the economy. Well, the problem is that inflationary aspect, which I spoke about a little bit before the break. Their dollar, that extra dollar they're bringing in, is going to be worth less. And again, inflation and unemployment are the two most predictable impacts of a minimum wage. To the extent that a minimum wage is harmless, or sorry, that to the extent that it's meaningless, it's harmless. If everybody's already paying above that wage, it does no harm. But to the extent that it's...
Yeah, but the wage compression aspect, right? And that's certainly these kind of concerns, and I've heard that from several of our business owners, Kelly, that what happens if you're paying somebody already $12, $13 an hour, and now
True.
you move that ceiling, from the floor up to now 12, how do you deal with that employee that's making $12, $13 an hour when somebody who has zero experience, zero training is now getting 12? What do you do with
Or
the
even if it's
person
not
that's
zero.
worked with
you got
you
the
for
five-year discrepancy or something.
15 years in a training and a credential that's there that you're paying $13 an hour, that's now looking at that coworker that's making 12 with zero background, zero experience and training, no longevity with the job. Those are, I think, what we hear a lot from the business owners that are concerned about that.
No, you're absolutely right. And, various studies call that the ripple effect or ladder effect, because every business, as your listeners all know, needs to have a hierarchy of wages. You have to have some way to reward the guy that shows up every day on time and that shows some initiative, does his job well.
Mm-hmm.
Should I be getting paid more or less based on what you just said?
I'm not dumb enough to answer that one. But just to touch on studies a little bit, they do like to point out a couple studies that show that there's been actual increases in employment after minimum wage hikes. Well, the problem is a lot of these studies, it's a little bit of sleight of hand. One of the main faults of a lot of these studies, they're looking at individual businesses as opposed to industries. So they're not looking at how many of these businesses within an industry have actually gone out of business. They're only looking at the survivors. And sure, some of the survivors may have taken up a little bit of the slack, but overall, within that industry, you invariably see job losses. It's kind of like Thomas Sowell, the economist, brilliant economist, pointed out in one of his books that it's kind of like having a study that shows that Russian roulette is safe because you've only surveyed the survivors. Mm-hmm. So,
that result's skewed.
Yeah, and there's other problems with a lot of these studies. Every serious economic analysis that's ever been done of the minimum wage hike shows only two impacts: unemployment and inflation, both of which hurt low-wage workers the most.
Yeah, and again, I think the intentions are great. I think taking care of some of our most vulnerable, some of those in society, making the least amount and trying to help them is certainly a admirable intention. But again, let's fight for 50. Let's fight for equipping these folks moving forward, and not to the extent of business closure. We could talk about free markets and go on, but let's shift over to 71, Raise the Bar. I think we put out a wonderful tweet of John Elway's commercial, and I said, if John Elway says it so, it must be so, right? We must raise the bar. Kelly, talk a little bit about 71. What is Raise the Bar? What's it intending to do, and why does it have so much support across the political spectrum? Every living governor, R&D both. supporting this issue.
Sure. Well, I think we spoke a little bit about it at the beginning of the last segment there. Our Constitution, like I said, has become a little more than a depository for the political whim of the day. And that's not what it was meant to be, and it's caused issues. The founding fathers were very suspicious of direct democracy, to put it lightly, and that's why they put into our federal system a whole system of checks and balances. That's why it's so difficult to change the United States Constitution. They didn't want the Constitution to be that kind of a tool. They really didn't want the mob, the mass, to be able to vote away somebody's private property or somebody's rights. And that's what we're seeing with the people are using the Colorado Constitution to do. We've probably all heard it said many times that America is a republic, not a democracy. And we're a little bit slaves to usage when it comes to vocabulary. Everybody recognizes that we are a democracy. However, what is the check on that? And in Colorado, there isn't much of one. So what Raise the Bar is doing is saying, look, if something is important enough to be on the Constitution, to be in the Constitution, then it needs to get broad-based support, and there needs to be some form of consensus. Right now, it takes a little under 100,000 signatures to put something on the ballot as an amendment or a statutory change. You can do that by going to 16th Street Mall or Boulder, or if it's, quite frankly, something conservative, down to Colorado Springs. You don't have to go anywhere else in the state. What we're saying is, if it's something that's going to be in our foundational document, the document that establishes how we govern ourselves as a state, then you need to go to Fort Morgan. You need to go to the West Slope. You need to go to the Southwest. So it's saying you need to get signatures from each of the 35 state Senate districts.
Prowers, Delta, Yuma,
Yes.
all these counties. And I think really, Kelly, the big push is the say of all Coloradans, the voice of all Coloradans that matter on these constitutional amendments. If they're going to be impacted, they certainly should have the right and should have a say in whether or not this shows up on our ballot every 2 years in November. Every living governor right now has endorsed 71. Hickenlooper, Ritter, Owens, Lamb, Romer. Giving those voters across the state a say is a component, Kelly, but there's also a threshold to raise the 50 plus 1 to 55.
Right. And again, what we're saying is that if something, again, is important enough to be part of our foundational document, it shouldn't be subject to a simple majority. It's not even going as high as what we typically think of a supermajority, which is 60%. But we are saying you need to get 55% of the state's voters need to approve it. I don't think that's a very high bar, quite frankly, for something that important. And part of what this does is that it'll incentivize some of these groups that if they do have an agenda, well, instead of tinkering around with our Constitution, do it the way you're supposed to do it, which is through statute. Use my metaphor from earlier, change the wallpaper instead of tearing down the wall. Now there is, some of the opponents point out, well, you're leaving it at 50% to repeal something, and you hear a lot of this from the nominal right, saying, well, this is an attack on Tabor. Well, a couple things there. First of all, it's a little odd to me to hear libertarians argue that we shouldn't make it easier to get rid of a law. That is put in there as a bit of a safety valve in case we do get something like Amendment 69, which we may talk about a little bit later. However, that will still be subject to the signature requirement. So it is making it harder to make a change to the Constitution one way or the other.
Well, there's certainly an argument from some of the activists, and I've countered that I believe this actually gives activists more power. If you're in a rural county, you can actually mobilize your residents, your base, your party to either not collect signatures or to get signatures added in there. And I believe it has the reverse of some of the arguments that these folks are saying, that it's just going to allow big money to come into the state.
It does.
Okay. We're going to talk more with Kelly Sloan, public affairs consultant working with various ballot measure campaigns. And we're identifying all of those so you can get a little better grasp right before you get your ballot ready to go. Stay with us. We're discussing a number of the ballot issues, ballot measures, if you're still undecided or just want that little push of knowing what you think the right thing is. We're talking with Kelly Sloan, public affairs consultant working on various ballot measure campaigns. And Jeff Wasden is here, president of the Colorado Business Roundtable.
Yeah, what a great time on Halloween to be talking about ballot measures. Are we the treat? What's going on?
Yeah.
Is this the scary part of Halloween today, talking the ballot?
We're the smarties. You either love them or hate them, right?
Well, there's several tricks and one or two treats in there.
I think real quick before we kind of wrap up on 71
Right.
and move on, I do want to make sure from the Colorado Business Roundtable and me personally that we thank and commend Fiona Arnold, director at OEDIT, on her announcement she's stepping down, re-entering the private sector, leaving a big hole and void over there that the governor's going to have to fill there. And I know I've emailing the governor's office and Fiona today, and we wish her nothing but the best.
Sure.
She's been a great partner, and I think such a tireless, energetic, passionate advocate for business in the state of Colorado. Fiona, wish you the best. So, Kelly, our state constitution been amended about 151 times, one repeal, and all of that time, I believe it's about 10 times more than the U.S. Constitution. Talk a little bit about why this matters and what 71 really is trying to do here, and wrap up that.
Well, yeah, the U.S. Constitution's been amended 27 times, and it was a 227-year history. And you're right, 151 times the state constitution's been amended. Only one has been repealed. And you look at what, especially lately, what has been trying to be put in there. Lots of tax measures. Pretty much every year there's a tax measure wanting to be put into the Constitution. This year alone, we have the minimum wage, we have single-payer health care, which we may talk about here in a little bit. Lord Percy of Newcastle had a famous essay in which he wrote that the goal of socialism is to render property forever insecure. Well, he might as well have been talking about our state constitution's amendment process.
They're probably a little too close to home corollaries. They could be drawn there. You're right.
And that's what Amendment 71 is looking to correct. It's not supposed to be a depository for these political whims of the day.
Well, and I'd say even just to kind of push back a little bit about that, whether it's political whims, whether it's outside interest, whether it's big money, or whether they're really well-intentioned, right? I think the idea of helping folks is a good idea, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But should it, again, be baked in the Constitution, and is that the right area, the right place in our state history and governance structure to be dealing with these types of issues? And I think that's where, while some of these might be great, it's not the right place, the right time, the right setting to do that.
Well, and if there's any flaws in any of these measures, like we talked about the flaws in Amendment 70, structural flaws in Amendment 69, they can't be corrected if they're in the Constitution. If they're in statute, they can be corrected.
Right. Yeah.
And that's one of the other main arguments we have, is that a lot of these things should be statutory, because you can't go back in something that's as permanent. Like I said, one thing has been repealed out of the one issue has been repealed, and that was prohibition back in 1930s.
Out of the 152?
Out of the 151 amendments that have been put in there. Only one has been repealed. That was prohibition back in 1930s. So once something is in there,
I didn't
it's
get
in
a vote
there.
on that one.
No.
Yeah, that's the thing. Once something is in there, it is, for all intents and purposes, in there forever.
It's there, yeah.
And and it's a problem that needs to be corrected.
Well, let's segue into this last few minutes here and talk a little bit. We probably won't be able to get too far into the weeds on some of these other measures. We've talked about most Denver Metro voters are really having 10 different initiatives. 2 referred, T and U, which are dealing with a property tax issue, and then cleaning up some slavery and indentured servant issues that are there. We've talked about minimum wage. We've talked about raise the bar, certainly the Colorado Business Roundtable, and we had CBCA on this week as well, talking about the SCFD reauthorization 4B and our support of that. Amendment 69, Colorado Care, is also one of those. Kelly, maybe we'll do some rapid fire as we roll through these and kind of share your thoughts. Colorado Business Roundtables, of course, certainly opposed to Amendment 69, risky, uncertain, unproven, untested.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and thank goodness most of the state agrees with you. You and I have talked about this a lot. We've been on various programs and debates speaking out against it. It's a terrible idea. Again, How
do you feel?
There's not much else to say. I come from Canada, where we have single payer health care. There's a reason. The base problem is that nobody's really identifying the problem of what is causing healthcare costs to rise. The reason healthcare costs are rising is because, in the main, we over medicate ourselves, we overtreat ourselves. We do that because there's already a disconnect between what healthcare costs and what most of us pay for it. Insurance is covering a lot of those costs, even with substantially rising premiums. But insurance is covering most of those costs. For most people, their employer is covering most of those costs, or the government is through Medicaid, Medicare, VA, and so forth. The problem with ACA and the problem with Amendment 69 is they exacerbate that problem by even creating even further disconnect between what it costs and what people pay. Amendment 69 is essentially going to be a healthcare subsidy. And anytime you subsidize something, you increase demand artificially. That demand is not going to be covered by anybody paying for it at the point of service, and it has to be rationed one way or the other. If you're taking out the price mechanism, it's going to be rationed by service. That's what you see in Canada with these hideous wait times. I've told the story often about the 19-year-old girl in Mississauga, Ontario, I believe it was, who died waiting for a liver transplant. She had a liver. They had a liver available for her. She died waiting for a bed.
Oh.
And that's the hard, cold economic facts behind single payer.
Good. Again, as we kind of roll toward 8-day countdown, and next Tuesday, there's a few other issues. Some of the Colorado Business Roundtable, of course, because it's not really a true business nexus.
Right.
We're focusing our priorities on some of these other issues. Haven't really weighed in, but certainly as those ballots are laying on kitchen tables and counters and people are trying to go to the ballot, let's talk about a couple.
Sure.
There's a cigarette tax issue that's out there that would triple the cigarette tax here in the state of Colorado. Any thoughts, Kelly, on that issue?
Well, the problem with it, again, some of these fairly well-intentioned ones, but the problem with it is it's creating a bunch of these new programs that are ostensibly going to be funded by the cigarette tax. Well, the idea is that cigarette tax is going to be a self-depleting tax. As more people quit, you'll get less revenue coming in. But these programs are still going to be there, and I can see, lobbying within in the next several years of people going in there looking for funding for these. Some of them are great programs, but once they're in the Constitution. It's another constitutional amendment. Now you're going to have these programs in the Constitution with a depreciating revenue source. People are going to be looking for funding for those well into the future. We already don't have enough money to spend on things that government should be spending on: public safety, roads, schools, that kind of thing.
Roads. 106, death with dignity, end-of-life options for terminally ill.
Well, I'm a Catholic, and so I certainly have some personal views against 106 in principle. One of my biggest practical concerns with it is the mail order portion of it. It's written in there. All drugs that are prescribed in the state have to be available through mail order.
Right.
Well, now you can get these poisons, and let's face it, that's what these are. These are poisons. Mail ordered to your home. There's no control over who uses them at that point or who has access to them.
Right.
Kids. It could be your teenage daughter's bipolar friend that comes and visits, or how they're used. I mean, you have this stuff here. You're getting a little tired of taking care of Aunt Margaret. I mean, there's too much risk there in that one, I think. Well,
and I say, from my point of view, and I agree with you, that the provisions aren't there. If you're going to pass something like this, I think you need to be very careful that, does somebody who's supposed to witness this suicide agreement, do they have to know the individual for any period of time? Do they need to prove that? I mean, it's a little too scary right now.
A lot of that is in there, and like you're right. There's not enough safeguards. There are not enough safeguards or provisions in there for something that's this drastic of a change in how we look at life.
I agree.
And the last two are under the umbrella Let Colorado Vote. It's 107, 108, bringing back the presidential primaries and a semi-open primary system to Colorado. We've got about 20, 30 seconds, Kelly.
Sure. No on both. Well, here's the thing.
Whoa!
I lobbied.
I need to play these opinions are not the express ratings on the Colorado Business Roundtable. It's host of the station.
I worked pretty hard to get a closed presidential primary passed during legislative session. To open, we'd actually talk about this quite a bit. We're running out of time, but to open that up to it's sort of like opening Planned Parenthood director meetings up to Colorado Right for Life. You know what I mean? I mean, with an open primary where you're allowing independents to pick and choose which side, just choose. There's nothing keeping unaffiliateds from voting in that state. All they have to do in a primary, all they have to do is pick a side.
There's some great leaders pushing 107, 108 came out of Building a Better Colorado. We're out of time. We'll maybe dive more into that later. Check out our website. We've got our ledge reception coming up.
cobrt.com/events to check that out. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Happy Halloween.